This week we've got an England and Tottenham legend. Someone who managed me and Scholesy with England and Wrighty, was Roy's hero growing up, and one of England's best ever midfield players, Glenn Hoddle.
About putting the best jockey on the horse doesn't mean the horse is always going to win. English coaches were lazy. We were the laziest coach.
He was terrifying. That is what Gary Neville said about Glenn Hoddle. Not loud, not aggressive, just terrifying. This is the story of how England's most gifted manager turned his camp into something players compared to a cult. How he broke Paul Gascoigne. How he betrayed David Beckham. How he made grown men walk backwards around pitches to create good energy. This is the story of fear at the highest level of English football. Glenn Hoddle took over England in 1996. He was a football genius. As a player, he could do things with a ball that others could only dream of. He was smooth, clever, and gifted. When he became manager, people hoped he would bring modern ideas to England. They were right. But they got more than they bargained for, much more. Hoddle brought in Eileen Drury. She was a faith healer. She was his personal friend. He had known her since he was a teenager. He believed she could heal injuries by touching people. He believed she had special powers. And he made her part of the England setup. This was not normal. This was not professional. This was the beginning of the cult. Steve McManaman played under Hoddle. He was a brilliant winger for Liverpool. He said the training camps felt like a cult. There was a split in the squad. Some players went along with the faith healing, others refused. Ones who refused felt punished. They felt judged. They felt like Hoddle favoured the believers. Selection was no longer just about football. It was about whether you accepted Eileen Drury into your life. Drury called herself an auntie figure. She said players could talk to her about things they would not tell the manager or the physio. This was dangerous. The players knew she was close to Hoddle. Anything they said to her might get back to him. There was no privacy. There was no safety. If you were injured, you could not just see the doctor. You had to see the healer. If you refused, you looked like a troublemaker. Ray Parlour tried to laugh it off. He was an Arsenal midfielder. He went to see Drury because he felt he had to. When she asked him what he wanted from the session, he joked. He said, "Short back and sides, please," like he was at the barber's. The room went quiet. Parlour was trying to cope with the awkwardness, but the joke did not land well. Later, Parlour was cut from the World Cup squad. Players whispered that maybe the joke had cost him his place. Maybe refusing to take it seriously was career suicide. Robbie Fowler said he did not have a problem with what Drury did. The problem was that Hoddle pushed it. He made it feel compulsory. Fear was not of the healing. Fear was of saying no. Tony Adams was the captain. He had to deal with all of this. Adams was a recovering alcoholic. He was open to therapy and alternative ideas, but even he found the situation painful. He called it excruciating. He had to be a buffer between the squad and the manager. Players came to him with their doubts. Hoddle came to him with his spiritual instructions. Adams was stuck in the middle. He saw how the Drury situation was splitting the team. He saw how it was destroying trust. He could not fix it. The terror for Adams was watching the squad fall apart and knowing he was powerless to stop it. The atmosphere in camp became poisonous. Players stopped being honest with each other. They stopped being honest with themselves. Every conversation felt monitored. Every action felt judged. Not by normal standards of professionalism or performance, but by invisible standards. Standards based on belief systems that had nothing to do with football. Players who had spent their entire lives being judged on results were now being judged on their spiritual openness. It was madness. The squad split into factions. There were the believers who went along with everything. There were the skeptics who quietly refused. And there were those in the middle who just wanted to play football. The unity that teams need to succeed at World Cups was impossible. How could players trust each other on the pitch when they could not trust each other off it? How could they fight together? And some thought others were spiritually unclean. Hoddle had created division at the exact moment when England needed togetherness. Then there were the rituals. Hoddle did not just bring in a healer, he brought in superstitions that made no sense. Before the Argentina match at the 1998 World Cup, Hoddle gave an order. He told the backroom staff to walk around the pitch anti-clockwise during the game. He said this would create positive energy. He believed the direction they walked would affect the result. Gary Neville found out about this from one of the masseurs. He could not believe it. This was the biggest match of their lives. England against Argentina. A match full of history and hatred. Their manager thought the result would be decided by which way the physios walked. Neville was horrified. He had been raised at Manchester United under Sir Alex Ferguson. Ferguson was ruthless, yes, but he was rational, based decisions on data, on tactics, on performance. Hoddle based decisions on energy fields. Neville later said his England career was a massive waste of time. He did not mean he hated playing for England. He meant that a generation of world-class players was wasted. Beckham, Scholes, Owen, Shearer, Campbell, all wasted because the management was not serious, because they were led by a man who thought walking anti-clockwise could win football matches. The anti-clockwise walk did not work. England lost on penalties. Neville was not surprised. He knew you could not rely on magic. You had to rely on preparation, but Hoddle never learned. Hoddle also had a pre-match ritual in the dressing room. He would move around the room before kickoff. He would shake each player's hand. Then he would touch them on the heart, just above the heart, every single time. Players found this deeply uncomfortable. A pat on the back is normal. A hand on the shoulder is fine. But touching someone's heart area felt invasive. It felt spiritual. It felt like Hoddle was trying to connect with their souls, not their football brains. For pragmatic players like Neville, this was torture. They did not want their hearts touched. They wanted clear instructions. The terror was in the uncertainty. Players never knew when they would be spiritually judged, never knew when their energy would be deemed wrong, never knew when a refusal to believe would cost them their England career. Then came La Manga. This was May 1998. The World Cup squad was being finalised. Paul Gascoigne was there. Gaza was a legend. He had carried England at Italia 90 and Euro 96. He was the heartbeat of English football. Everyone assumed he was going to France. Gaza assumed it too, but Hoddle had doubts. Gaza was struggling with fitness. He was struggling with discipline. Reports said he had been eating kebabs days before the final selection. For Hoddle, this was unacceptable. Hoddle had maintained his own fitness through strict discipline. He expected the same from others. He decided to cut Gaza from the squad. Hoddle called Gaza into a room at La Manga. He told him he was not going to the World Cup. Gaza exploded. He flew into a rage. He smashed the hotel room. He punched a lamp. Glass shattered everywhere. Hoddle thought Gaza was going to hit him. Gaza was barefoot and out of control. He was sobbing. He was broken. Teammates had to restrain him. This was terrifying for everyone who saw it. This was England's greatest talent, mentally destroyed. And Hoddle watched it happen with cold detachment. In his diary, he wrote about being proud of how clever his plan was for announcing the cuts. He focused on the logistics. He did not focus on the human cost. He did not show empathy for a man in crisis. For the other players, this was a warning. If Gaza could be discarded so ruthlessly, anyone could. If Hoddle could cut hero of Euro 96 and then publish the details of his breakdown in a book, no one was safe. The brutality of the decision was shocking. The lack of protection was worse. The Gascoigne incident exposed the core problem with Hoddle. He saw weakness as a character flaw. He saw vulnerability, something to be punished. Gaza was not just a player who had lost fitness. He was a man struggling with mental health. He needed support. He needed understanding. Instead, he got a cold rejection and then public humiliation when the story appeared in print. Other players watched and learned. Never show weakness. Never admit you are struggling, because Hoddle will not help you. He will cut you and then write about it. And yes, Hoddle did publish it. After the World Cup, he released a diary called Glenn Hoddle, My 1998 World Cup Story. It was ghostwritten by an FA official. It was serialised in newspapers, and it contained everything: private conversations, medical details, emotional breakdowns, the Gaza incident, everything. Football dressing rooms have a code. What happens in the dressing room stays in the dressing room. Hoddle broke that code. He monetised it. He sold the squad's privacy for a book deal. Gary Neville was appalled. David Beckham felt violated. They realised their manager had been taking notes the whole time. Every conversation was material. Every mistake was content. Hoddle said his main concern was to get a quality book out and put things down on record. But the players saw it as betrayal. The psychological safety required for a team to function disappeared. Players became afraid to speak, afraid to show weakness, afraid that their words would end up in print. The terror was that the dressing room was no longer sacred. The diary was especially brutal to David Beckham. Hoddle had been mind-gaming Beckham all tournament. He dropped Beckham from the starting lineup of the opening matches. Beckham did not know why. Hoddle later claimed he had planned it all along to keep Beckham hungry, but at the time, it just felt cruel. Beckham was confused and isolated. Tony Adams tried to support Beckham. Adams could see that Hoddle's methods were destroying the young player's confidence. Beckham even had to attend a pre-match press conference without knowing if he was starting. It was humiliating. Then came the Argentina match. Beckham was sent off for kicking out at Diego Simeone. It was a moment of stupidity, a moment of petulance. Beckham knew it. He sat in the dressing room afterwards, devastated. England lost on penalties, and Hoddle blamed Beckham publicly. In interviews, Hoddle said that if Beckham had not been sent off, England would have had 11 men and would have won. He said he was convinced of that. In his diary, he doubled down. He criticised Beckham's focus. He said Beckham had been warned about silly antics, but obviously had not learned. He even claimed Beckham was no better at crossing than Darren Anderton. This was absurd, but it was published for the world to read. Hoddle refused to accept collective responsibility. Great managers like Ferguson or Wenger defend their players publicly. They might destroy them privately, but they protect them from the media. Hoddle did the opposite. He fed Beckham to the wolves. Beckham faced a level of abuse that was unprecedented. Burning effigies, death threats, a hate campaign, and Hoddle offered no support. He just pointed the finger. Beckham was 23 years old. He had made a mistake in the heat of battle. It happens. But instead of an arm around the shoulder, he got blame. Instead of protection, he got public criticism. The nation turned on him, and his manager led the charge. For a young player, this was devastating. The one person who should have defended him had abandoned him. That is what made it truly terrifying. Beckham's redemption came later. He became captain. He dragged England to the 2002 World Cup with a free kick against Greece. But that happened despite Hoddle. It happened because Beckham was resilient. The lesson Beckham learned from Hoddle was terrifying. He learned that when things go wrong, you are alone. Andy Cole also felt Hoddle's coldness. Cole was a Manchester United striker. Hoddle criticised him publicly. He said Cole needed too many chances to score. Cole hit back. He called Hoddle a coward for not saying it to his face. Hoddle later recalled Cole to the squad in a spirit of forgiveness, but the damage was done. The word coward stuck. It summed up how the players saw Hoddle, a man who hid behind press conferences and diaries instead of having honest conversations. Cole's situation showed another pattern. Hoddle would make harsh judgments about players through the media, then he would act surprised when they reacted badly. He seemed unable to understand that public criticism damaged relationships, that it made players defensive, that it destroyed the trust needed for a team to function at the highest level. Then came the end. In January 1999, Hoddle gave an interview to The Times. He talked about his belief in reincarnation and karma. He said that disabled people had not been born with 2 hands and 2 legs for a reason. He said the karma was working from another lifetime. He suggested disabled people were paying for sins from past lives. This was the logical conclusion of the anti-clockwise walking and the faith healing. It revealed a worldview that was not just eccentric, it was morally repugnant. The backlash was immediate. Hoddle was sacked on February 2nd, 1999. Even then, he claimed he had been misunderstood, but the transcript was clear. For the players, the sacking was probably a relief. The cloud of karma was lifted. The fear of the diary was gone. The healer was removed. Glenn Hoddle was not terrifying because he shouted. He was terrifying because he was unreachable. He operated in a world of spirits and energy fields that his players could not access. He demanded total belief, but offered no loyalty. He preached positive energy while publicly destroying young players. He spoke of healing while inflicting deep psychological wounds. Gary Neville, Paul Gascoigne, David Beckham, Tony Adams, and Steve McManaman all tell the same story. Hoddle was a tactical genius, but he lacked humanity. He viewed players as vessels for his experiments. When the experiments failed, he blamed their karma. When they succeeded, he wrote a book about his genius. The Hoddle era is a warning. Tactical brilliance means nothing if you terrify the people you lead. You can have all the ideas in the world, but if your players are afraid of being spiritually judged, afraid of being publicly betrayed, afraid of being cut for refusing to believe in faith healers, you will fail. Hoddle's legacy is not his tactics. It is the scars he left on a generation of players, the fear they felt, the trust he destroyed. That is what legends remember. He was terrifying.